Hello, I am a person. Specifically, the type of person who is always thinking about, planning to, contemplating, wondering what it would be like if I actually started making, content. But then, brain happens and that doesn't. But then I saw an announcement from Pointy Antonio D'Amico Hat saying that Monster Week was coming back. So I figured, you know what? This is as good a chance as I'm gonna get. It's actually giving me a deadline, so I'll have a reason to focus and get this shit done. So, for those who, you know what, no, there's no possible way this is the first video from this event that you've seen, but regardless, it's part of the package. Welcome to Monster Week. What's Monster Week? It is an annual, well now it's an annual, event from Pointy Hat and Ginny D, two of the biggest D&D people on this platform, who are bringing together the whole Tater Pig community to just talk about whatever monster or general vibe related to a monster that they've chosen for that specific year. And this year the theme is...
Look at that, a dragon.
So yeah, welcome to Monster Week Dragon Edition. This is... I didn't expect my first video to be about D&D. I'm not fully planning on making my whole channel a D&D channel, but hey, I have been playing for about 2 years now, and I've got some opinions, and I do happen to have a very particular idea that is related to dragons, so why not? Here we go. So, for starters, this whole idea came from one particular piece of art that you may have seen about a cafe where the waiter has a dragon, a little tiny dragon on his arm, bruleeing some creme. Yeah, that's where this idea came from. Seeing that image of the little pet dragon working at a cafe gave me the idea of, ooh, what if cat cafe but dragon? And so I made up a little location for, some time, some place in any game I happen to run, or that you happen to run now that I'm telling you about it. I called it the Drakery, where the owner just runs this little shop full of little tiny dragons that sit on your lap. I'm also a big fan of the OP shopkeep trope, so he's also a swarm keeper who commands these tiny dragons to do some pretty wild stuff. But that's a whole other topic. When I came up with that idea of this baker commanding an entire shop full of cat dragons, I thought, oh, wait a minute. Why isn't there a swarm of tiny dragons? Because we have the perfect candidate. But at the same time that I had this idea, I was in a game where we had a Pact of the Chain Warlock with a Pseudodragon familiar. So I thought, wait, why not have a swarm of Pseudodragons? That could be pretty wild. So I, got fixated and spent way too long thinking about it, but the longer I thought about it, the more I realized, hang on, this is actually kinda wild and scary. 'Cause the thing about swarms in D&D is that they're... the novelty wears off quickly. They're not that impressive, and often they're kinda just more annoying. They have unique mechanics that no other monster type has, but once you understand how they work, it's kind of just busy work getting rid of them. Hello, I'm a person in a different shirt, and I just realized while I was editing this, I never actually bothered to stop and explain what the hell a swarm is or does, so yeah, let's actually go over that first. So in D&D there is a subcategory of monsters called swarms. I say subcategory because they are not really a creature type in and of themselves. They are a collection of some other kind of animal. So they're not their own thing, they're just a bunch of things working together. That's obvious from the name, but mechanically they do a couple of funky things. First of all, being a crowd of tiny animals gives them a lot of condition immunities, because you can't just stop the whole mob at once. So things like paralyzed and prone and a whole bunch of others are just not on the table, because they, you can't do it to every single individual member of the crowd at once, so it just doesn't happen. And by the same token, they are also resistant to physical damage, because, again, they're not a single creature, not a single medium-sized thing to just smack with your weapon. They are, always moving and flowing around each other, so even if you hit the mob, some of the force of your weapon is going to pass around and between the individuals and only hit a few of them. So any weapon damage gets cut in half. And the other unique thing about them is they don't attack a target that's next to them. Unlike any other creature, they can occupy the same space as another creature. Anything else you can, maybe pass through their space with difficulty, but you can't stay there. Swarms can gather around their target and stay there, and that's the only way they can attack. They have to swarm around a person and... So yeah, that is a basic breakdown of swarms. So I thought, what would happen if you took that idea and applied it to a much more interesting creature? So the first thing I did when I started thinking about how to make a monster like this was, okay, how do swarms normally work and what are they normally made of? And the first thing I noticed is pretty much every other swarm in the game is made up of, not just tiny creatures, but extremely weak ones. CR 0. Any given swarm you want to face, you got bats, birds, bugs, snakes. Any individual from that swarm is considered mathematically no threat, even to a single level 1 character. Even things like the Sawagine swarm and the cranium rat swarm, because the things that make those interesting, respectively, is that they are larger than any other swarm, and that they are smarter than any other swarm. The Sawagine hatchlings are still just, basically piranhas. They do have one unique-ish ability that lets them do more damage because they go into a frenzy, but ultimately what makes them dangerous is more the environment. Very few player characters are built to go underwater, so that gives them home turf advantage, as well as being, more of them, making them a large size category. That's really all there is to it. It's still really straightforward and more irritating than actually interesting. Now, the cranium rat is where things get a lot more interesting, because when they gather into a swarm, they're not just dealing more damage and moving in a unique way, they actually gain new abilities that they could not use on their own, even conceptually. For those who aren't familiar, cranium rats, have little weak psionic abilities in their tiny exposed brains, and when enough of them gather together, those weak abilities sort of resonate with and enhance eeach other and create a unified hive mind that suddenly skyrockets in intelligence and even gains spell casting. I find that a really interesting idea. It is a true representation of being more than the sum of its parts, because an individual cranium rat is just a rat. But when they come together, they become this actual force, an actual intelligence. And that's an interesting idea. Being more than the sum of your parts because you amplify each other in some way. So, let's bring that all back to the Pseudodragon. What kind of abilities does a Pseudodragon have that might cause an effect like that? The first thing you'll notice about a Pseudodragon is that even at just CR 1/4, it is still way the hell stronger than any other individual from any other swarm in the book. Individually, not that big of a difference, but once you start bringing them together, it's gonna stack up in a way that you don't quite get with those tiny, fragile things that are individuals from other swarms. Like, you got your birds, your bats, your bugs. All of those things are ignorable on their own. A Pseudodragon kinda isn't. The second thing I want to draw attention to is their stats. Not just, being overall higher than other swarm members, but look particularly at their intelligence. Each individual Pseudodragon is as intelligent as an average humanoid. That is huge, actually, because it means every individual member of a Pseudodragon swarm is able to think and plan and strategize and prioritize on its own. And that makes them far more dangerous than creatures acting on base instinct, especially when you combine it with their most iconic ability. unlimited telepathy. These things can communicate with each other in their minds. And that means, combined with their intelligence, they are going to be more coordinated, more strategic, and just better prepared than any other swarm in the book. That immediately makes them a hell of a lot more dangerous. And then combine that with the keen senses ability that gives them advantage on perception checks, and it means it is virtually impossible to sneak up on these things. And when you remember that their telepathy has a range of 100 feet, and a swarm consists of dozens, at least dozens of individuals, buddy, these guys can monitor an absolutely enormous area. So imagine for a second, your party just wanders into a cave for whatever reason, run a perception check and notice, oh hey, little tiny dragon on the ceiling. Hi little guy, what you doing? You lost? And then, as they continue deeper, they see another one. And then another one. And again, they're just CR 1/4. It's not like they're any real threat to a full party on their own, so they probably just ignore the thing and keep on going deeper into the cave, until they arrive in a large cavern. And as they approach the center of the room, they start to notice little pinpricks of light all around the walls and all over the ceiling. And as they suddenly figure out where they actually are, roll initiative. I really like when something that gets dismissed and ignored suddenly comes back and says, oh, you should have paid more attention. So you just walk up to the little thing like, oh, hey, little guy, you lost. Oh, shit. Which brings us to how these things would actually operate in combat. Like I said, they have advantage on perception and omnidirectional awareness and blind sight, so even turning invisible isn't going to help you. And once any individual one of them spots you, the whole swarm knows about it, so you're not getting out of this. And let's stick with the unique ability that the Pseudodragon has, that limited telepathy. Because, again, if they are able to think and prioritize and strategize and communicate collectively, because unlike the cranium rat swarm, who are only intelligent as a group, who create a single mind when they are in a swarm, the Pseudodragons are all processing and planning on their own. And that means they can actually figure things out in a way that the cranium rats couldn't. I think that's enough preamble. Let's actually take a look at this stat block. Okay, I rambled for way longer than I thought I was going to, and I don't want the very first video on my channel to be a half-hour slog, so I'm gonna cut it off here and make this a two-parter, I guess? Oh boy, the last day of Dragon Week is tomorrow. I need to... Oh boy, okay, so yeah, thank you anybody who watched this. Do the YouTube things, go watch the other Dragon Week videos, playlist below. I'll figure out a clever intro some other time. Later.